Today we're going to get started on one of the more technical chapters in our book, The Power of Critical Thinking by Dr. Vaughn. And it tends to be one of my favorite topics because it gets us into deductive reasoning, which is always, that nice absolute yes, no, true, false. And so our answers are very clear, except that they do take a little while. Okay, I think that's what mostly bothers my students is that you can't do that and get an answer. So this is likely something that you've never seen before, and so I want you to give yourself a little extra time to kind of sit with the concepts, maybe do a little bit more practice than you would normally do, and make sure that this kind of solidifies itself in your head. Now, for those of you who are big readers and that kind of stuff, I have the very last slide on the Chapter 7 notes has I have it up there, is the how to make a truth table in just words. It's sort of like following one of those online recipes, do this and then do this and then do this. And it helps some folks to kind of get that in their heads, but we'll get there. Again, this is going to take a little more practice. It's going to take a little bit more of your time, which I know is at a premium, but it has to be done. So Chapter 7 and Chapter 8 in the 7th edition are two very technical chapters. We're going to do them together and then have a test and put Chapter 9 in with the last unit because it's all inductive. So we're just going to be living in deductive world for a little bit here, and you'll like it here eventually, I promise. But truth tables are a little bit tedious, so if that's something that you have trouble with, bear in mind. Okay, so our Chapter 7 begins on page 229. That's kind of the outline for the chapter. We're going to do this in 3 parts. And so the first part is all the basic stuff, and that's what we're going to do today. So that's 7A is about 9 pages, 10 pages, and so then we're going to talk about connectives and truth values. Propositional logic is kind of the title of the chapter. A little bit about, hey, we also use symbols and symbolic logic. If you go look up symbolic logic somewhere like Wikipedia or the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, it's a huge thing. We're just borrowing a little bit of it right now, so it'll be okay. Conjunctions, disjunctions, we've talked about the disjunction before in Chapter 3. Negation and conditional, we also talked about conditionals in Chapter 3. And so they have some interesting ways of being expressed as well. In Chapter 7, they also break up the exercises only in 2 spots. Well, 3, but we're not going to do that last part of the chapter. Anyway, page 238 for the conditionals. For the exercises for your homework, exercises 7.1 through 7.6 is on page 239 to 241. We'll get through those today in this section. And then 7B, the page numbers are 241 to 245. Stop at tricky arguments. And then 7C, we're doing 245 to 248. This is parentheses and 3 variable truth tables, and we're stopping at the short version. I find that folks who really can hold a lot of things in their heads can go on and do the streamlined version or the short method, and they have no trouble. Most of us, myself included, have trouble holding more than 3 or 4 ideas at a time. And so I don't think you have to have the short version or the proofs at the end of the chapter in order to understand truth tables and those relationships. And so we don't do those. Mainly, honestly, it's a measure of time. We want to get to inductive. And if we stay in this deductive land too long, and we want to go through all those other things. That's an extra month, and we don't have that kind of time. So anyway, if you really enjoy truth tables and you like that idea, it's kind of like it's a logic puzzle. And so if you like those kinds of things, feel free, extra credit for extra work and all that. But I'm not going to make you go through those sections, and I'm also not going to put on the test. So, fair is fair. So 7A, when we get to this idea of how do we find out if our argument is valid? And again, anytime we're talking about valid arguments, we're talking about deductive, okay? Deductive arguments have, I just lost it. Sorry. Deductive arguments have conclusive evidence, right? Valid or invalid structure, okay? And sound evidence. Now, the good part about the middle, the structure part, we can lay out a deductive argument in symbols and variables and take the shortcut. Okay, we don't have to hold all that information in our head and move it around to make sure it fits together. We can shorthand. And that's really, really all that this propositional logic sets up is the shorthand. Once we've done all the work and figured out all the relationships, then we can tell whether something's valid or invalid very, very simply, and I'll show you how to do that too. So first, let's get our basics. So propositional logic is also called truth functional logic. It's the branch of deductive reasoning that deals with the logical relationships among statements. So you're taking one statement and fitting it with another statement, and fitting it with another statement, and another statement, and these all have a structure. And if the structure works, then we have a valid argument. And we're going to talk more about how we know one way or the other as we go along. And propositional logic gets its work done by using symbolic logic. Now, we have done already some moving things around. We did modus ponens and all that kind of stuff, right? And so we know that P stands for some sort of phrasing, right? And it's phrasing number 1. Q is phrasing number 2. Always, always, always. Now, let me back up just a second. You can use any letters you want, but you have to be consistent. And unless you want to be constantly translating between what I'm doing and what you see in the book and your own letters, just use P and Q, okay? Makes life so much easier, especially here at the beginning. And then R, when we get there, is also, it's phrasing number 3. And we have to be careful when we're looking at these word problems especially, that we're marking these up correctly. And again, we're going to get to those when we go along. So far, not too horrible, right? And I have this other stuff up here I have to show you. So we have basically 4 symbols that we're going to use. 5 if you count parentheses a little bit later, but they're a little bit later. These are the symbols that get the work done, telling us how these different phrasings, these different statements are put together, okay? They're kind of the glue. And so we don't have any words now. We used to have and or if then. Now we just have symbols, okay? Now, I'm going to tell you where to find these symbols too as we go along on your keyboard so that you can make them correctly and not have big things blowing up all over the place in Word and all that, so it'll be fine. So a conjunction. I don't know how many of you know about Schoolhouse Rock, but there was a, used to be my Saturday morning cartoons. Now they're considered vintage. I guess I'm a little vintage too, so you know. Anyway, conjunction, junction, okay? Putting together words and phrases. That's what it does. And we know our conjunctions in English, and, but, or, nor, for, yet. Okay, so we have a bunch of them. Some of them get used different ways, okay? Conjunctions for us are and then there's a few others, okay? Go over here and find that little spot. On the bottom of page 232, but, yet, nevertheless, while, also, and moreover. Those are also keywords in figuring out, okay, so how do I put this together? How is this going together? Some of them are pretty easy. And, but, moreover, okay, and again, also, and again. And so just keep those in mind when you're looking at things, okay? We use the ampersand. You can use whatever symbol for and you like, but the ampersand is the preferred, you know, you can use a little and plus whatever, but the ampersand is what you're going to see in the book all the time, so you might as well get used to that. And we use it together like this, P and Q, Q and R, okay? And it has some rules too, and we're going to get to those in a minute. The disjunction we've seen before, okay, P or Q, okay, penguins or quail. It's a little lowercase v, nothing special, just a lowercase v. And it means or. Sometimes we have either at the beginning. If you do neither nor, then you have an and, not. A not here. This is our negation. Negation is basically opposite day. Whatever value P has, not P has the opposite, okay? And it's the little tilde. That is one of the ones that people have trouble finding on your keyboard, okay? On the far left side, you have the caps lock and tab, and then right above that is the little tilde and something else. So you have to hit shift first and then hit that. So that works that way. Conditional, we know it's an if-then. The antecedent is the if, and the consequent is the then. And it's an arrow, so it's 2 dashes and that greater than sign. And that way you get those to come up right. Sometimes your program will make it be a big arrow then. Don't stress, it's okay. Just make sure you have your arrow going the right direction, that's all. Okay, so easy peasy that way. I want to show you a little bit more in depth about each one. And we're going to go in our book. And so you're on page 232 for conjunction. And we finally get into our idea about a truth table. Okay? So a conjunction is shown by and its truth table is a little bit weird. Okay, so a truth table is a little bit weird, but we're going to figure this out too. So if I'm going to set up the conjunction, we always have our 2 variables because we have a relationship here. The only one that doesn't have 2 is the negation. Okay, so when we're trying to put our symbols and our variables together, we always go by 2 by 2 by 2. 1 symbol, 2 letters. That's the most we can work with at a time. Okay, and then we have over here our little statement. Okay. So these are the individual pieces, right? P is one set of phrasing, Q is another set of phrasing. You put them together, you get P and Q, what's their value, okay? One of the things that you have to know, have to hold in our heads all the time, is every statement has a truth value. Now, some things we can just look at and go, oh, that's true, or oh, that's false, but not always, okay? We're trying to figure out if a particular argument is valid. And in order to do that, we have to figure out what the truth values of all the possibilities of those variables are. Now, all the possibilities, that's where the tedium comes in, okay? Not so much when there's 2, and this is a very simple argument, okay? Think about just some very simple things, okay? So the first one they give us in the book is ducks have webbed feet, ducks have feathers. So, or therefore, ducks have webbed feet and feathers. Okay, so very simple, very easy to figure out, okay? So if I have to figure out how many ways to put this together, okay? So I have to have all the possibilities. Now, when I took logic, formal logic, for deduction logic, they never gave us rules on this. This was just something you just had to know, okay? I'm going to show you a couple rules that always work, and Dr. Vaughn backs me up. So when I'm going to make a truth table of any kind, doesn't matter how bizarre, big, whatever, I have to start with my naked, bare variables, okay? My letters are my variables. And so I have two. My argument is ducks have feathers and ducks have web feet. That's my conclusion, okay? That's over here. I have these two variables that are always going to look the same way anytime I put them into a truth table. Hear that out. P's and Q's, later on R's, are always going to have the same values in the same order every time you put together a truth table. That's the easy part. Okay. In fact, you can put it in an Excel sheet and just cut and paste, copy and paste it in to wherever you need. Okay, that's what I do. So when I look at this, I'm gonna put this over here so I can move it up. So if I'm trying to figure out my truth table, okay, a truth table really, and I didn't give my bottom row very much room, did I? But that's okay, is really a grid, okay? How do I know how big that grid has to be in order to get all the possibilities of these two pairings together, okay? So I need to know how many truth values raised to the power, and I know we're getting into math here, raised to the power of how many variables I have. That's how many rows I'm going to need, okay? So the good news is truth values is always 2, true or false. That's it. No maybes, not in deductive anyway, okay? Now my variable numbers, okay, I have 2. So 2 squared is 4. So that's how many rows I need. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now how do I know what letters to put in there? Now you can play and mess around and figure out, okay, I need to have 2 trues and 2 falses for this guy, and 2 trues and 2 falses for this guy. But how do I arrange them so that I get all the possibilities and I don't have to waste a lot of time? Here's the prize. It's the half and half rule. Okay, your first row, your first column, which is P, okay, gets 1/2 true and 1/2 false in order. Okay, so I have 4 rows. So I'm going to start with 2 trues and then do 2 falses. Okay, true, true, false, false. Okay, so far I have doubles. I have to get rid of my doubles. Each set has to be unique. So then I do the half and half rule again. So that half and half rule is half of this. Okay, Q is whatever that is, half of a half of T and half of a half. False is 1 true, 1 false, together times 2. Okay, so 2 sets, basically. True, false, true, false. Okay, so I have 4 rows, and you don't ever have to use the numbers on these. It's just right now I'm going to be able to talk about things. So I have a true and a true and a false and a true, and a false and a false. Okay, so I guarantee you those are the only 4 possibilities for these 2. Okay, and so each one of these is unique, and it's all the ways they can be put together. So not too horrible because, you know, we're just doing 4. Now, the rule for a conjunction is in order for P and Q to be true, both P and Q have to be true, okay? So true sentence equals 2 true variables. And that's it. Everything else is false. So if I'm true and true, it's true. True and false is false. False and true is false. And false obviously is false. And anytime we have that particular structure, the P and Q, it's always going to look like this. Okay? Now, I say that, and it's true all the way. I'm not baiting and switch here for you. The thing is, these might be in a different order based on a different, a longer thing. So we add our R in there, then we have to do other things. But this is the possibilities. Okay? We only work with 2 variables at a time, and we only ever use one symbol. Okay? And I'll say that a lot. Okay, this is how it looks all the time. Even if and even when on the days it doesn't make any sense to you, this is still right. This is still true all the way through. Okay? So what I do, and I didn't bring it with me today, what I do is I put all 4 of these truth tables on a little 3x5 card, and then I use it as my bookmark. So I can just look, find my little pieces, and there they are. They are in the book in various places. This one is on page 233. So you have that. Okay? The next one is a disjunction. Okay? This one is the only false sentence is 2 false variables. So as long as one of the variables is true, you have a true sentence, you have a true statement, okay? If both of them, if P is false and Q is false, then you have a false statement, okay? So be careful with that, but I'm going to show you the disjunction. Okay, again, we're using P, Q, P or Q, and it's the same ta-da, okay, true, true, false, false, true, false, true, false. Now, my rule is the only false sentence is 2 false variables. Everybody else is true, okay? The big deal here, and this is on page 234, the disjunction has greater fluidity, okay? More of them are true than not, okay, because you get a choice. Now, you also have to remember that we have 2 different meanings for or. Oh, I'm going to put that up there too. Okay, so we say and, we say or, we say not, we say if, then. Those guys, okay? The disjunction is an or. Well, we have 2 different kinds of ors in English. We have an inclusive, okay? We have an inclusive that tells us, and I'm gotta find my spot again, sorry. Inclusive is one or the other, so P or Q, or both, okay? Okay, so when we looked at the disjunctive syllogism in chapter 3, we said we have 4 different possibilities, right? Either P is, we have P or we don't have P. And if we have P, we don't have Q. Okay, so we were doing an exclusive. If we use an inclusive, and a lot of it depends upon, well, all of it depends upon how things are laid out in your argument. If we can't tell, we use the inclusive version. If we can tell, okay, it's just P or Q. Okay, so if we have P, we can't have Q. If we have Q, we can't have P. Inclusive means we could have P, we could have Q, or we could have both. Okay, so it makes a little bit of a difference occasionally, but not always. Okay, there's a really good, fun philosophy thing on page 235. Arguments we have known and loved. These are kind of the exemplar kind of arguments. If all that exists is matter in motion, then there are no disembodied spirits. All that exists is matter in motion, so there are no disembodied spirits. There are some other ones in there that are really good too. So when we're using the disjunction, though, we need to be careful, inclusive, exclusive. You're going to get some answers in your arguments that kind of go, what? But same idea, same setup. You'll notice the P and the Q are the same there and same there. Okay, so I want to move on in just a sec, but a cup of tea. Or just a sip. Okay. Remember, you can always go back and look again, or pause me before I get to the bottom of this if you haven't got all your notes yet. Okay. When we're looking at negation, okay, this is just opposite day. Okay, so my little truth table here for a negation is P and not P. That's it. Okay, so if P is true, not P is false. If P is false, not P is true. And this follows the same rules here, right? I have 1, okay, 2 to the 1 is 2. Okay, half and half rule, I have 2 rows, so 1 of each. And then over there, I have to do what it says. False, true. Okay, so you have to be careful. This is where a lot of folks make mistakes, and then, of course, their choice of valid or invalid can shift. So be very careful. Negation is just not. Now, there are different ways to say this, okay? So if you look on page 236, that's where the pieces for that are, or at the bottom there. It is false that, it is not the case that, sometimes it's just a no, sometimes it's a not, sometimes it's a non. You just have to be careful and look for those negation words in your pieces. One other thing that's really interesting about negation, especially in English, we do this all the time. So if I have not P, what is not P? Okay. If I negate my negation, I go back to P. Okay. So you're never going to see 2 nots, really, unless they're just testing your knowledge here, which they do. But 2 negations take me back to a positive. And that's a rule in English. It doesn't tend to be a rule other places. If you're coming from an Arabic language or Sanskrit language or a Hindi language or something like that, then you're going to have all kinds of problems with this, because most of the time knots are intensifiers. But for English and Greek too, by the way, 2 knots, 2 no's make a yes. Okay, so be very careful there. The last one, and really this is the one that I have to sometimes just go, all right, that's how it works, is the conditional. Okay, so we have our P and our Q, and then we have if P, then Q. Okay, and again, 2 dashes and the greater than sign gives you your arrow. Sometimes it makes it big, but it's okay, don't stress. So again, I have two variables, so I'm going to do my 4 rows. I'm going to use my half and half rule, and 2 trues, 2 falses, and then my half of that is 1, so true, false, true, false. Now, we are looking at a conditional statement, okay? If I get my lessons done, then I can read my book. Okay, it's my hope every day. It doesn't happen very often. So if I get my lessons done, I can read my book. If P, then Q. Okay. If I get my lessons done is true, then I can read my book is also true. If I get my lessons done, but I don't read my book, is false. If I don't get my lessons done, but I still read my book, that's a true statement. And if I don't get my lessons done, and I don't read my book, also a true statement. Okay? So, this is the one that, honestly, just memorize it like a usual card or whatever. Okay? Conditional is dependent on the if. Okay? The if is also called the antecedent. Remember that from chapter 3? And the then is the consequent. Okay? The consequent depends on the antecedent. That's why it's conditional. Okay? So if the conditional is met as true, but if the antecedent is met as true, then our conditional, our consequent, needs to be true as well. Okay? If it's not, we have a false statement. Okay? So that's the only time. Okay? Only false in that. If the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, then the whole thing is false. That's the only time. And most of the time it makes sense to me. Okay? Occasionally, I just have to do the curtsy. Yes, that's how it works. This is how it works. This is true all the time, whether we get it or not. Okay? This is true all the time, whether we get it or not. Same thing with the conjunction, same thing with the disjunction. These guys are your givens. Okay, anybody who had any kind of geometry, you're given A equals B. And then you play with it, right? And tell me how it works. And we're going to do A plus 1 and B equals B plus 1. True, because we added the same number to both sides. Same idea here. This is always true. This is always the way it works, okay? Now, we fill it out this way, but we're reading it this way, okay? So if P is true, then Q is true. Our whole statement is true. If P is true, then Q is false, we get a false statement. My way of making this go much faster is learning where my weird one is, okay? In my conjunction, the only true is with 2 trues in my variables. For my disjunction, the only false is with the 2 false. So I can go through my list and go false here, and then fill in trues as I go up. And I'll show you that when we get to bigger things. But anyway, it's not as hard as it looks. I guess is what I'm trying to say. Don't let it freak you out. Now, conditional statements, if you go to page 238, there's a review notes thing about how they work together. Okay. Now, the other thing that you have to know is a simple statement or a claim is one that does not contain any other statements as constituents. A compound statement is one composed of at least 2 simple statements. Okay, and we're going to get into some of this as we go along here. Now, at the bottom of that review notes, and then there's explanation examples here at the bottom of page 238. words used in conditionals, okay? And this is something that I just mark. I take one of my nice little sticky guys and I put it at the top of the page so that when I'm working on my word problems especially, I can go back and check. Now, you may be able to keep all that in your head all the time. I can't. So I go check. I write things down. I tell people all the time, the biggest lie I tell myself is, I don't need to write that down. I'll remember. Yeah, because that's not true, ever. Anyway, okay, when we're looking at conditionals, our normal statement, and I'm going to write some of these up here because I want you to see how it works. On page 238, okay? So if we do if, then, okay, this first part is our antecedent. This part is our consequent. And we do the if P then Q, or now that we have the symbol, P to Q. Okay? So, we have a lot of ways that we can express a conditional in English, okay? And really, we boiled it down to 4, okay? So if it just starts with if, that's our antecedent, then consequent. Now sometimes if, the if statement gets put after the then statement. Happens in English, we're weird, okay? Let's see. So we have 4 other ways to introduce things. If your thing is introduced with only if, it introduces the consequent wherever it shows up, okay? So if you have P only if Q, okay, P only if Q, we're going to do it like this, okay, so you have that up there. P only if Q. Consequent, okay, so it's if P then Q. So if you find an if in the middle, make sure it's not an only if, because that flips things a bit. Okay? Provided, or provided that, introduces the antecedent. Okay? So if you have something that says P provided that, or provided Q, it's actually going to look like this. Q, then P. Okay? Because it introduces the antecedent. Provided introduces the antecedent. We always, always, always label our phrasing before we start putting this thing together. Okay? The first phrasing, like I said before, is your P. The second phrasing, new phrasing, is your Q. Okay, and for now, that's all we're doing. We'll get to ours later, a couple days from now, maybe. Okay, unless introduces the antecedent. But it does something funny too. So P, unless Q, looks like this. Not Q, then P. Okay, it's that un part there, unless. Okay, so it's a if not Q, then P. The other one that we see a lot is whenever. That also introduces the antecedent. So we have whenever P, Q. Whenever there's P, there's Q, okay? Is, if P, then Q, because see, it introduces the antecedent. Goes first, okay? Those are the important pieces. So if you're looking at page 238, you'll notice page 239 starts our exercises 7.1 through 7.6. And then after that begins what I'm calling 7B, and we'll get that on the next lecture, okay? No, I don't, okay. We'll go on to 7B on your next trip here, so I hope you have a great day. If you have questions, let me know. You know how to get a hold of me. You have my email.